Welcome back to 28storms.com. This is your tropical weather update for Sunday, June 19th. We continue to enjoy relatively quiet conditions across much of the Atlantic Basin today. There is a tropical wave now beginning to move over the eastern half of the Yucatan Peninsula, and it will be entering the southern Gulf of Mexico and Bay of Campeche within the next 24 hours. Thankfully, upper-level winds remain unfavorable, so we do not expect any immediate development in that area. Now, things are a bit different down to the south of Mexico, however. We've been monitoring tropical disturbance, or Invest 92E, for the last, past week or so, and we've been expecting it to become Tropical Storm Beatriz, and sure enough, we finally have Beatriz today, and it's becoming very well organized, as we'll take a look on more zoomed-in satellite imagery in just a moment. Latest SIMS wind shear analysis shows that a persistent mid-level to upper-level ridge still exists over much of central Mexico into the far eastern Pacific, which is where our tropical storm now is located. And as we've seen over the last 72 hours, there is still some light easterly wind shear, but overall, the wind shear is not strong enough to limit development. But that's a different case out here in the Gulf of Mexico, where we still have fairly moderate west-northwest winds aloft, and not only that, but a lot of dry air. So we're not expecting anything from that tropical wave that's about to make its way into the Gulf of Mexico. The latest water vapor shows this quite well. There's a lot of dry air and wind shear, but down toward the south, that's where we have our more focused area of monsoonal trough conditions, with a lot of moisture abundant in all layers of the atmosphere, and also the wind shear is a bit less. We've seen a fairly dramatic change in the organization and structure of our system within the last 24 hours. It's been gradually becoming more organized day by day, but over the last 24 hours it's been a lot more significant. We now have an explosive development of convection right over the low-level circulation, which is right around this area. If anything, we still have that slight easterly shear, which has caused the central dense or developing central dense overcast to be tilted a bit toward the southwest of where the center is located. But nevertheless, we definitely see more banding features today, and just an overall more impressive central dense overcast feature compared to yesterday, when there really was no persistence of the convection whatsoever near the center. And another positive compared to especially 36 to 48 hours ago is that we no longer have any dry air intruding anywhere close to the low-level circulation of the system. So at this time, it's all systems go for continued intensification, with only very little wind shear being inhibiting factor over the next couple days. Here is a 3-day animation of the precipitable water across the eastern Pacific, and you can really see how our system has come together over just the last 72 hours. Here is the latest steering in the low to mid levels. As we can see, our storm is beginning to move more toward the west-northwest. To the north, we have this mid-level ridge, although it's going to begin to slowly weaken as this much more intense area of long-wave troughiness over the western United States continues to dig toward the south. So this upper-level ridge, and especially the western half of it, is going to begin to erode over the next couple days. So we could begin to see more of a change from west-northwest to more of a northwest component in the storm's track. And that's the reason why we're keeping a close eye on this system for portions of the Mexican coast. Here's a satellite representation of the steering. We can see down here over central Mexico we still have persistent mid-level ridging, but that long wave trough over the western United States is becoming more prominent with time, and it's going to continue digging over the next 72 hours. This is the latest update from the National Hurricane Center. Sustained winds are now up to 40 miles per hour, and it's continuing to move west-northwest at the current time at 10 miles per hour. Although if you look at their forecast track, they do anticipate more of a northwest component to the track beginning fairly soon, and tropical storm warnings are up for much of the central part of the coast, in addition to a hurricane watch, and hurricane conditions are possible within the next 48 hours. Now, as you can see toward the end of the forecast time, they do expect more of a bend toward the west as that mid-level ridge begins to build back toward the west as that upper-level trough begins to lift out of the western United States. Here is the latest spaghetti plot of model guidance. As we can see, the models are still split. Some still take them far enough toward the west to where it stays away from much of Mexico, whereas you still have a couple model members like the GFDL and HWRF that take it more north straight inland, possibly as a hurricane. So obviously there is a good reason to have at least some concern if you're living along these areas. All of the model intensity forecasts continue to show continued intensification. In fact, the latest ship's forecast does expect Beatriz to become a minimal Category 1 before weakening within 60 to 72 hours. It now looks like a minimal Category 1 can be expected based on the latest satellite trends. This is the latest GFS 5-day precipitation forecast, and one thing that is of some concern is that as the storm approaches the coastline, as that mid-level ridge, the main steering factor, begins to break down, so will the forward motion of our tropical system, and a fairly slow progression is expected as it nears the coastal area, which will thus increase the chances of significant rainfall. And the 5-day GFS forecast does show a large swath of coastline receiving within 5 to 10 inches of rainfall, with isolated areas receiving over 10 inches. So, as stated before, even if the immediate center does not pass directly over the coast, there is the threat of significant rainfall to the northeast of the center. As we already see on the latest infrared, there's a lot of convection that spans several hundred miles away from the primary circulation, and this is expected to continue riding up the coastline over the next 3 to 4 days. So, to summarize, residents along the coastline of Mexico, especially near Manzanillo, should really be preparing for the threat of minimal hurricane force winds that will be arriving possibly as soon as within the next 48 hours. But more importantly, you should also be ready for the threat of torrential rainfall, especially if you live in an area that is prone to mudslides. And as far as the Atlantic is concerned, we're still not looking at anything imminent within the next week. We will continue to monitor perhaps the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico the most over the next 10 days, as those two locations appear to have the greatest threat of at least below normal sea level pressures, which could set the stage for a bit easier tropical development in that area. But as of today, none of the models show any development. So that is your tropical weather update for this Sunday. We'll keep a close eye on Tropical Storm Beatriz as it nears the coast, and we'll have another update for you guys either later this evening or definitely by tomorrow afternoon.